All right, good evening, everybody. For those of you who don't know, my name's Mel and I'm the president of the IABC Queensland chapter. Thank you so much for coming along tonight in person and online. Maybe you want to turn around and wave at the camera, everybody, and say hi to everybody online. Hello. So we are really privileged tonight to be joined by Joe and Greer from the PR Darlings podcast. And they are going to run tonight's session essentially like a live podcast interview. So we're very excited to have them here. I would also like to officially welcome their guests, who are now our guests, Michael and Craig, and we'll give them a better introduction once I stop talking. Before we push on though, I would like to take a quick moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are tonight and which we are so lucky to call home, the Yuggera and Turrbal people, and pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. And I extend that welcome to any First Nations people here who are joining us tonight, either in person or online. So without further ado, I will hand over to our panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So thank you, IABC Queensland chapter, for inviting Joe and I along to host tonight's panel. Tonight, we're going to be delving into the topic, nuanced media relations in a complex world. So the definition of media today incorporates everything from national mastheads to viral memes. The rate of change in this space is extraordinary, and accordingly, in 2022, PR and communications professionals need to be increasingly adaptive. As journalists and news outlets compete for eyeballs among a growing sea of channels, personalities and changing rules, PRs risk actually becoming the story themselves through typos in their pictures. It's our worst nightmare to be outed on a tweet.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but also media conventions that some of you may have used or you may have heard of. So things like off the records and backgrounding. We now risk being outed for those media conventions. So we're really interested to have this discussion tonight with two amazing journalists.
And so tonight we're going to discuss embargoes. Have they had their day? Exclusives, the do's and the don'ts, the difference between backgrounding, on the record, off the record, when to use those. We're going to talk about journalists who need to build their own brands and how your typo can turn into that horrific viral tweet. And the live press conference, the rise of the live press conference, the armchair journalists, the keyboard warriors that we now see, and the on-the-ground gate crashes, which I think is just like your worst nightmare as well.
So on the panel tonight, we have Joe and I, and then we also have Craig Johnstone, the editor of InQueensland, and Michael Coombes, both arrived hot from their jobs today in the newsrooms. So he's the Deputy News Director at 7 Queensland.
So thank you so much for making the time to come along today, whether you're in your Ugg boots at home or in real shoes today. How exciting for us to all be in a room together. Our aim today is to help you learn or refresh your skills around these tricky sort of media conventions. But first of all, let's start off by introducing ourselves. I'm Joe Stone.
And I'm Greer Quinn.
And we are your PR Darlings, which is a podcast all about the dark arts of public relations, publicity, and all things media. Greer and I actually met at the ABC. We were both journalists there. And Greer started her career, really cut her teeth in regional journalism before starting her own PR company, Forward Communications. Her real interest is internal and external comms, and she's worked for some amazing national companies. We're talking Rio Tinto, BHP, Suez, just to name a few. And I love working with Greer. This collaboration with its PR Darlings has been so much fun. You're so generous with your time and your knowledge. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe. That's a very generous introduction. So Joe is my co-host with Most. Joe herself is actually a very impressive media identity, having worked as a reporter and presenter for ABC TV, ABC Radio, Channel 7, and Metro Radio, where she reported on politics, sport, courts, general news, pretty much everything.
All things.
All things. And today, Joe runs her own PR agency called Sticks and Stones PR, where she specialises in consumer PR and legal PR, and also runs media training. Thanks.
All right. And so we want to introduce our special guests tonight. So Craig Johnstone is the editor of InQueensland, which is really a new kid on the block in terms of digital independent news, but Craig's been around for a long time.
Very long time.
He's had all these kind of editor and assistant editor roles at the Courier Mail and the Australian, but he's also got experience on the dark side, which we really love, in corporate communications and business communications, government relations. So we're really excited to pick your brains tonight about your experience in that area as well. So welcome and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, great.
And we have a media purist, as we like to say, Michael Coombes.
He's never left the job.
He's never gone to the dark. Amongst the shadow workers tonight. So Michael, as I said before, is the Deputy News Director at Channel 7. He has worked his way through the ranks from journalist to producer to management roles. He's actually been with the network for about 25 years. And if you live in Southeast Queensland and you work in PR or communications, you have probably been fortunate enough to catch him on the other side of the phone when you've been pitching your best TV stories in.
For which I apologise.
He's all going to attack you later. You've actually always been friendly. I could have brought it up tonight. But
so both of you worked in media for a long time, 25, 30, 35 odd years. What is it that keeps you really interested in journalism and jobs in the media? Should we start with you, Michael? What do you think?
Sure. For me, it's still the variety. And being a storyteller. I love storytelling. I don't write my own stories these days. I sub other journalists' work essentially, but being able to help them tell the stories as well. And you just think you've seen it all. And every time you think you've seen it all, something else happens and you scratch your head and you go home that day and you say, I can't believe that day. I can't believe that story just happened. And that's 25 years. Still, everything's new, everything's different. So, and it's not just the rapid change in technology and how people are consuming news. It's actually the stories. The stories just keep changing and keep evolving. It's incredible.
It's a wonderful thing about journalism, isn't it?
It is. Yeah.
How about you, Craig?
Yeah, well, it is all about the story, and the fact that as a working journo, you never know what's going to happen during your working day. I've been reporting in Canberra and reported on several leadership challenges. Those are where you operate, 14, 15 hours on a day on pure adrenaline, and you exhaust yourself, but then you can't get to sleep afterwards because the story of that sort of ambition and the wielding of power and you get to tell it is just so addictive. It is like a drug. And yes, I've been doing it for quite a few years.
Fascinating, actually. And Michael, you did mention there's been a lot of change. What would you say are the biggest challenges or changes that are facing media today? And I'll ask you next. So, Michael, if you want to go first.
To be perfectly honest, the biggest challenge is getting eyeballs. It's getting people to watch. There are so many different areas where people will find and consume their news. And it's not necessarily a good thing because people aren't finding their news necessarily from reputable news sources either. So you have to put out a product that is responsible. You have to put out a product that tells the story, is balanced, gives both sides, and is honest and is trustworthy. But you're competing with instant gratification, and you're competing with mediums that are instant. People get their news from I know people who will only get their news from TikTok. Heaven forbid, but it's true.
The hyperbole and the non-truth is sometimes the quality that people go towards that, and it's entertainment, and so it must be very difficult for ethical news services to compete with that.
Yes, it is. It's a challenge. I think it's a challenge that everybody in media. Well, when I started 25 years ago, television would never have considered itself, old media. I guess in some ways now that's what we are. But I also think that there are some positive signs there. I think that by staying the course, by maintaining integrity, viewers will come back. And I think that is happening, and I think you can see some signs of that already, where people who want to know the news will go to the more reputable and the more trustworthy sources for news.
Interesting. And Craig?
Yeah, the key word there is trust. I think Michael mentioned that you've got to work hard to get it, and then you've got to work hard to maintain it. But in the end, it pays off because you regard it as a source that whatever you say is believable. And you can see that with, say, the ABC during disasters. The ABC's ratings spike during floods simply because people turn off TikTok and actually go to the ABC to find out really what's going on in their suburb in terms of how should they respond to a disaster.
So Craig, in Queensland actually started right as COVID hit. You launched,
Yes.
it was
Brilliant
February
timing.
2020. Can you just explain worth time? And how has it gone? How are you going? You're still here. I think that's an amazing thing. What's it been like?
Well, it's been a pretty interesting ride, actually, coming from an established part of the media world, News Corp. This was a startup in every sense of the word. It's actually owned by Solstice Media, which until recently had Eric Beecher as its chairman. Eric in turn owns Private Media, which has Crikey and a couple of other publications. Solstice started in Adelaide with a publication, well, I say publication, it was all online, in New Daily, which is about 10 years old, in Daily, sorry, which is about 10 years old. In Daily was an antidote to the Adelaide Advertiser, which I don't know if anyone's from Adelaide, but the trajectory that the Tiser took is much like the trajectory that the Courier Mail's taken here, and therefore there were gaps in the market which In Daily exploited, and they Solstice thought that might just work here in southeast Queensland, and it turns out that it has. In that, we're not about to compete toe to toe with the Courier Mail, but we do offer very in-depth, very relevant business coverage. We offer very considered political commentary. We also offer a breaking news service, and it's all free.
And so do you think that's kind of worked in your favour with everything that's been happening with COVID, all of those things?
I think it has, yeah.
It's been an interesting news period, and I've been so impressed with InQueensland's reporting. So I was saying before, when it first popped up, I thought, well, as a PR person, I've got to make sure I subscribe. But I wasn't really expecting much, and I've actually been quite blown away at the level of reporting. So if anyone's here, it is free to subscribe, and I'd recommend that you do. And it arrives in your inbox twice daily.
Yes, at 12 o'clock and 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
So COVID started, and we just saw this really big rise in the number of live press conferences. So you've gone from doing things sort of behind closed doors to it suddenly being on a Facebook Live. How has that influenced the way InQueensland and Channel 7 have approached their reporting over these last couple of years? Has it changed, Michael, what you've been doing?
Oh, look, to be honest, I don't think it's changed so much of the way we report, certainly not for 6 p.m. Obviously, we will run those live media conferences on our Facebook page as well. So during the, the height of it, the height of the pandemic, we would every day we'd be running out, we'd be going to the control room, we'd be crashing into whatever programming we had to bring the Premier's media conference and the Cho's media conference live into every television. So that was probably more sustained rolling coverage or breaking into coverage that we have done that I can remember in 25 years. We've done longer periods of just wall-to-wall coverage, 2011 floods, for example, G20, that sort of thing, where we just didn't go off air, basically.
Yeah.
Hours upon hours upon hours.
Royal babies.
Royal babies, yeah. Thankfully not handled out about worried about those. But yeah, I think in terms of that, being able to very suddenly and very quickly turn around and put the live media conference to air. That was probably new for us, doing it so frequently, but it was nothing we hadn't done before. So it was just like, we just got more used to it.
Just doing it faster.
Doing
and
it more
quicker.
quickly,
Yeah. What about in Queensland? Did it change
Yeah,
much?
not really. No. We never had the ambition to actually link to a live press conference and have people view it through our platform. I know when these things started, probably the 2011 floods were the first time that politicians in Queensland anyway were regularly live on air for 45 minutes, an hour at a time. Journalists initially reacted to that by tweeting just about everything that was said. Nowadays that doesn't happen. They're more interested in getting their question up and sort of seeing whatever's been said in context. For us, the live media conference broadcast on Twitter and the Palaszczuk News Network, as it's called, Facebook, it's pretty good because we're a small outfit. We can't have someone full-time up at 1 William Street or travelling around with the Premier. So for us, it's a godsend to have these live feeds so that we can actually report on what's being said without being there, which is great. In some ways, it's much better than what it was 5 years ago. You sort of were wanting to be at that press conference. Nowadays, it doesn't really matter that much.
You can get it some other way.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I know for me, watching the live press has made me feel like I miss journalism and miss being there as well. It was a bit of a reminder, but I think what the pandemic did, and I guess the rise of the live media conference as well, it pulled the curtain back on some of these behind the scenes practices or conventions, media conventions, we call them, that industry understood protocols. So it also, I think, gave, in my opinion, the public an appetite to view those behind the scenes, almost like a bit of a reality TV show to some extent. And for the first time, print journalists as well as broadcast journalists were being scrutinised, not just for their actual reporting and their analysis, but also for the way in which they asked a question. And these would often be tweeted about. This, I'm talking the height of the press conference, and the process as well. So I think people, the audience members, didn't really know that this is how journalists actually collected the news in the first place. And some of them watching the live press conference, if they then went back and a part of the press conference wasn't repeated, might have thought that it was like a gotcha moment. How do you think that these live press conferences and I guess the unveiling of that curtain has impacted on the perception of media from the average public? I know that's a very long question. It's what I do.
Do you think it's harmed journalists?
Do you think it's harmed journalists? We noticed a lot of our friends in media at that time were really harassed, particularly TV journalists who were very visible when they're out in the public. There was a bit of an aggro.
I don't know though. Can you put that down to the rise of the live media conference, or can you put that down to social media in general and this trajectory that we've been on since social media, where, you know, people have a voice through Twitter, people have a voice through Facebook comments, people have a voice now on Instagram and TikTok and, you know, all of these platforms, and they want to use it.
It's democratized, but then it's not necessarily we would never air a press conference in its entirety because, you know, there'd be fact checking, there'd be contextualization of certain things. Yeah, so it was quite. What do you think, Craig? You probably have something to say.
Well, I've mentioned 2011 before, the floods, but I think the decisions that were made then by Anna Bligh as Premier at the time, that she was going to front this. She was going to tell the story of the floods. It immediately became a political story. So it wasn't the police reporters, it wasn't the people who usually report on emergency services that were reporting. It was the press gallery, and they have a certain style of eking out information. And you could see that right from the get-go. This was the premier, therefore it must have been a political story, therefore the political reporters were on the front line. And it hasn't really stopped since then, I don't think. You know, a very sedate press conference with the fire commissioner or the police commissioner talking about, you know, which suburbs were being evacuated, which was what it was like beforehand and what it was like interstate before Anna Bligh decided to become a weather girl. Was challenged everything. And nowadays, you know, there are certain protocols that have been thrown out the window in terms of talking over questions and you know, having your question asked and answered and then allowing somebody else to. I think it was interesting that Caroline Kennedy, the new US Ambassador to Australia, chipped a male journalist for talking over a female journalist at the press conference that she had when she first arrived in Australia.
That's right.
Because she was used to a different style in the States,
Yeah.
where they sort of they're very formal over there in well, they used to be anyway. They probably still are with her, but yeah, it's always been a scrum, but it was a scrum with rules.
With rules
Now,
and
I
etiquette.
think, you know, because you've got an industry that's very, very competitive, much more competitive than it was back in the day. There's always this pressure to actually, you know, be the person that's the most prominent in that
And break the
yeah.
story.
Yeah.
We definitely want to touch on that a little bit later too. Let's jump into some of those conventions. Let's talk about embargoes. Do you think that they've had their day? Do you like a little bit more notice? As PR professionals, what we might do is we might have an embargo when we've got a story that requires a whole lot of different stakeholders or a whole lot of different case studies, and we'll pull those in. Would like to give just these case studies to this journalist and these case studies to here. So just, we need time sometimes from our side.
To organise
To
it all
organise it
and
all.
to be able to one-on-one reach out to each of you and
Yeah.
then still have that, I guess, equality in terms of time frame. So it's not necessarily like a cunning tactic. It's
Yeah. It's
a
actually
logistical thing
logistics for us.
Yeah.
What do you think of embargoes? Do you guys like them, Michael, for example? Do you love an embargo? Or is it like just a pain in the backside?
To be perfectly honest, I see the word embargo and I see that it's for, you know, a day or two and I move on.
Really?
I move on because
Wow.
we don't have time to sit there and, oh, okay, this story's under embargo, but what's the story? And let's work on it now and let's get everything lined up because we're out chasing the news of the day. So at the end of, you know, realistically, when I see embargo, I shelve that story until the embargo ends.
Right.
I think embargo, I take your point. I think also historically they have been used a little by PR people to try to get your timing right in the news cycle. So the other thing that I see is an embargo until midnight or 2 a.m. And I think, well, that's obviously so that all of the prints can get their stories out. And then we TVs are expected to run it at 6 o'clock. Well, we're less likely to run that story in a 6 o'clock news. Like anything, it depends on the story.
Yeah.
But I think embargoes from where I sit are a waste of time.
Okay.
A waste of time purely because we're not going to have time to work on a story. Exceptions would be things like Australia Day honours lists.
Yep.
That sort of thing where there is a lot of work involved in a story and we know that there's going to be too much work to do on one day.
Yep. So big national stories more likely to be acceptable. And then in terms of that, you've looked at it and you shelved it until the day. Would you turn up on the day? Like, you know, if there was a press conference organised for the day, you would turn up if that was.
Depending on the story, sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's not that I see an embargo and I say, well, I'm not going to run that story.
Yeah.
But I see an embargo and I think, well, I don't have to worry about that story because I've got a dozen other stories in front of me that I do have to worry about. So I'm not going to worry about that one until I have to worry about it.
Okay. What about in Queensland, Craig?
I think we probably taken a different approach. Say, for instance, Steve Johnston, the CEO of Suncorp, was going to talk about, which he did, talk about how planning laws in Queensland were needed to change because it's flood. More houses are going underwater, and you put an embargo on that because he wants to tell the shareholders about it before.
Yeah.
I can understand that,
Yeah.
provided that Steve Johnston makes himself available to our journalists before the embargo, so that we know we talk to him, we understand all the issues. We're across things. As soon as the embargo ends, we're out there with a very in-depth story that you know is a service to our readers and probably is a service to Suncorp and Steve Johnston as well. In that
That's us living the dream.
Yes,
PRP.
yes. Got very happy then. But yes, and I think there is obviously a difference between digital and print and what TVs might use in that case. So maybe a little bit more notice.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking too, back in the day when Joe and I were working in newsrooms, the embargoed media release was most commonly used, from my observations, by politicians.
Yeah, that's a different kettle of fish.
Yeah, and I was just thinking in today's day and age, and I don't know because I'm not in a newsroom anymore, how would that fly, I guess, when a politician is using an embargo? Would you be inclined to respect it still? There was a study Joe mentioned before our chat where 96% of journalists still follow the embargo. Sorry, 94%, but 6% actually have said they ignore them now. Do you think that embargoes are maybe to some extent, specifically for political stories, no longer relevant? Or
Well, yeah, I think it's a matter of once bitten, twice shy. If you see an embargo on a press release by a journalist, I know from bitter experience that means that somebody else has got the exclusive, and you're going to have to do catch up the next day when the embargo is lifted, because there is no embargo. Somebody has the story and is going to be running it before you have a chance to do it. And politicians do this all the time. I can understand why they do it, but in the end, it erodes trust in them, and that's why the 6% don't worry about embargoes anymore, because they've been burned too many times.
Yeah. So, is there pressure on journalists to break the story? Then is that what we're seeing? So there's 96%, 94% that are sticking with it. The 6% that are breaking those embargoes. Can we trust that embargoes want to stick with it? Is it moving forward? Is it just going to be more and more? Is it going to be broken?
Yeah, we'll get in trouble. Joe and I'll get in trouble.
Yeah, we would be, as a PR, you would get in trouble if the embargo is broken.
Yeah.
Then you've got to, front up to your boss the next day. So it's this, how important is it that a journalist breaks the story, and what can we do to make sure that our relationships with you are better, to make sure that you'll stick with it?
Well, there used to be a saying, if you can't get it first, get it right. And embargoes are a case in point where you did want to get it right. Maybe some way back when I was a young journalist, maybe getting it first was more important. But I know now that getting it right is probably more important than actually getting that exclusive. So it comes down to trust, I think. And if you can build a relationship with the business core of journalists in your particular area, then chances are that they'll honour the embargo. The trouble is that there's so much churn in journalism these days that you can't really establish that relationship. You put in a lot of this is speaking as someone who's been on the other side. You put in a lot of effort to actually establish a relationship. They move on. Somebody else comes in, usually younger,
start over.
and you've got to start over. So.
Contact lists constantly getting updated.
Yeah, that's right.
And what about exclusives for TV, Michael? We know that embargoes are just sort of on the back. Yep. But in terms of exclusives, if we offered you an exclusive, would you be more inclined to send a crew out to cover that story, or would you be more motivated if you thought that your competing network were going to get there and you might miss it?
Look, honestly, it depends on the story. But exclusives for us are brilliant. They're fantastic. They're a point of difference. And there are stories of the day that everybody will be covering. So what sets us apart from the opposition are those stories that we either do them differently, we do them better, or we have different stories and better stories. But the other selection of stories in the news. So exclusives are really great to get your hands on, and we love it. You know, obviously. Like, show me a journalist who doesn't love an exclusive.
They don't say that, but Joe's gonna
ask you about that. You want to know what exactly do you see as an exclusive? Now, for us, it might be that we want you to run it, but we also have KPIs. We've got people breathing down our neck at our end, saying you need more coverage, we need more eyeballs on this. So is there a time frame between us giving it to you as an exclusive and then us giving it to others? Is it only yours and nobody else is allowed it?
I don't think so, but I think it's a case of being upfront.
Okay.
I think it's just a case of being upfront and saying, hey, we're going to offer you an exclusive, and what we'll do is we'll put out a media release after you've run the story. And we've done that on several occasions, plenty of occasions, where we'll run the story, we get first bite of the cherry, the story goes to air, and then out comes the media release. So I think that's fine. I have no problem with that, but it's just communication, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, everybody knows where they stand. So I wouldn't argue with that. I wouldn't argue with us running a story first, and then out it goes to the general mass.
So it runs on, 7 News at 6:15, and then at 6:30 out goes the press release to everybody else.
Yep.
You'd be happy with that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And that's something that has happened on more than one occasion.
Okay. Craig, what about digital, in terms of digital and?
Oh, well, I was going to ask Michael, what happens if somebody gets wind of the exclusive that you've got?
What can you do?
That's right.
We try and stall. If we've made a promise, we'll try and stall that. And if we can't say to the other journo, hey, someone else has the exclusive, because we're potentially making it even more of a story.
It happens every day.
Yeah.
To be honest, it happens every day where you think you have an exclusive, and then the next thing you see it pop up somewhere else, and you say, oh, well, that one's not exclusive anymore, and out goes the exclusive. It does, it happens.
And Craig, you had a recent experience on this. Do you want to talk us through a little bit of that?
A war story.
A bit of a war story, yeah. So.
Bit of a bellyache, sorry. The story was that last week I got a tip-off that the Health Minister, Yvette Darth, had been recently diagnosed with melanoma, and will be taking some time off to get well. I rang, made contact, sent messages to her office over about 3 or 4 days. Absolute silence, not even an acknowledgement that I'd received my call or message. On Saturday morning, I got up after the Broncos had lost, so I was already in the bad mood.
Disappointed already.
And lo and behold, on page 3 of the Courier Mail, here is an exclusive from Yvette Darr saying, I've got melanoma and my hairdresser tipped me to it, but it's wonderful now, and isn't everything tickety-boo? Well, it wasn't tickety-boo with me. And the explanation when I calmed down was that, well, this is a health issue. Health issues are very important. It's up to the particular person how they deal with it. But that is bullshit.
Rubbish.
You're allowed to
This,
swear on our podcast.
Yes, it was awful that Yvette Darth had been diagnosed with melanoma, but from then on in, it was a story. Everyone, she knew it was a story. Certainly her office did. Certainly the Premier's office did, and they just manufactured this exclusive with the Courier Mail to the detriment of us. And in terms of trust, what I was saying before, I'm not going to trust that office ever again. And you know,
Because
for what?
And
because
So
you get your butt kicked too, don't you? Like journos get their butts kicked if they miss a story. So
Well,
it's
you're
actually
you're the boss.
butt
Yeah,
kicker.
so you know,
but you talk about embargoes and stage managing, and that was an example where
Yeah,
we shot the bulk of that story on the Friday under an embargo for Saturday.
okay. So that's, you're
So
even
that's-
angrier now, aren't you?
That's stage managing.
It was something that they'd done with mainstream media.
Mm.
However, you know, we're pretty small, I know,
Yeah,
but we do matter.
shouldn't be overlooked.
And yeah, it's left a sour taste in our mouths.
Yeah.
And that's a lesson there for PRs, isn't it?
Mm.
About relationships and making sure that you
Mm.
continue to look after the people that are in your network and
Journos hold grudges big time,
Yes.
and they will
they've
remember
got long
for a
memories.
really long
Yeah,
time.
really long
Yeah.
memories.
But
Yeah.
that also goes to trust, as you were
Yeah.
saying. Trust is a two-way street. You know, it's great for us to be trustworthy organisations and to present the news faithfully, but there has to be trust
They,
with the people who we're dealing with as well. We have to be able to trust them as well.
they could have potentially, how would you, if you were on the other side, because you have worked both sides of the
Yeah,
fence,
yeah,
how
and
would you manage that? if-
It's
yeah.
happened to me as well.
Yeah.
When I was working with the LGAQ, you set up this, you give a story to somebody because you know it's going to get a good run and they'll treat it really well. And they know the issue and so on and so forth. But then somebody else, their competitor, actually gets onto the story and a couple of days later calls you and wants to confirm. The only way, well, there's two ways. You can actually say, well, yes, mate, you're onto something. Can you give us a chance to explain to the person I've given the story to that it's not exclusive anymore, and can we work something out? You know, negotiate a bit, use that trust that you've built up to actually get over this discomfort, or you know, you can horse trade as well. You can say, look, sorry, you missed out this time, but we'll take care of you next time when there is another story. And sometimes that works. Sometimes they tell you to piss off, but that's part of the game. But to ignore somebody
ignoring is bad.
It's that's bad, isn't
Yeah,
it? Yeah.
yeah.
And it also can also become the story because then it becomes has refused to comment or, you know, didn't return phone calls, which can also create a crisis of itself,
Yeah,
you know,
well,
of in
yeah.
itself later on.
with breaking news, that's definitely a no-no.
Mm. So it's tricky for us because we often will offer these exclusives and then again, under pressure, we want to get an answer back and a reply. Is it actually feasible to reply to every email? How many emails would you get and pictures would you get a day, do you reckon?
I have a note here from my chief of staff. I sat down with him this afternoon, as I told you earlier. And I sat down with the chief of staff and he said, what did he say? I think he said he gets about 100 story pictures a day.
Right.
So,
Is that for the whole of Queensland, or is that, what's the
well, this is the
geographic?
Brisbane news.
This is just
Mm.
So
Brisbane,
this is
yeah,
the Brisbane
okay.
news. So he reckons he'll get about 100 story pictures a day.
Yeah.
So we're not reading. It's easy for a story to slip through. So his advice on that one was actually pretty simple. Like, seen the story pitch, give us a chance to read it. Don't hit send while you're dialing our number.
Yeah.
You know, hit
Yeah.
send, give it half an hour, give it an hour, give us a call. Hey, I just want to check that you got my email. You know, that's and follow it up that way. That way you can be sure that we've seen it, which is the first thing, because it can slip through. And it also it just means that you've got a better chance,
Right.
because you're following it up, but you're giving us a chance to read it first. And then so yeah, it's
So
just,
about
there's
100 odd pictures a day. Yep. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a lot, isn't it?
And-
If you spend 2 minutes on each one of those, that's a lot of your day eaten up just
And
doing
they're
that.
long, and they're long. Some of these pictures are really, really long. Like, I'm talking full page emails, and we're not going to see a full page email. We're going to read that first line. And if the first line doesn't grab us,
And so
we've moved on.
sometimes what we'll do is we'll put like a four dot points at the top of the email. These are the 4 things that you're going to read about below here, and it's got, you know, case study available. This is the topic. These are the 3 lines that we're going to give you. Boom.
And that's great.
It's
Keep
helpful.
it simple. Keep it simple. Keep it concise. And then if we need more information, We know what to do.
Call us.
Yes.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
call us. Yeah.
And because print or digital, you might want more detail, like TV is gonna be, what's the picture, what's the.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that you might actually want to do a bit more of a deep dive.
Yeah, but it's the stories, the picture's got to be well told. Like, you know, I'd get emails, personal emails saying, "Hi, Chris."
Yeah,
and
this is what we're
that's-
paranoid about, but we're gonna end up on a tweet.
and the other thing that a lot of smart PR people do is they immediately put the Dropbox link right at the top of the release, so that you know you've got pictures if you need them, or
At the top,
yeah,
I will start
video
doing that
or-
because I normally do it at the bottom. I
Um,
mention it, but I normally, yeah.
yeah, but because you get 100 a day, if you see that Dropbox link, you know that, you know, this has got value other than whatever the story is, because we're a small outfit, we're desperate for pictures and video. So if you can provide that to us, well and good. I used to hate that. And I've got photographer mates who still hate it, but if you can provide us with those images, all well and good. And it's so common these days, like the Q Weekend magazine, a picture of Ian Fraser on the front last Saturday, all contributed.
Yeah.
No in-house photographer whatsoever. So unfortunately, that's how
We
it
see
is
a lot of that.
And if we're hiring you know, news photographers, which is what we try to do, we're saving money and hopefully actually providing support and help in a way that also, contributes to the quality of your publication.
All right, so jumping, I'm just noting the time.
Oh, yes,
Yeah,
thank you,
so
Jo.
just jumping quickly, what about on and off the record, Craig? Can you give us a little? And like, you know,
how do you school an interviewee, or how would you, if you were telling a PR person how to actually go about making it super clear what's on the record and what's off the record?
Well, I spent most of my career in Canberra, and Canberra wouldn't operate without off the record
and backgrounding.
and backgrounding. And
Do you want to just explain what it is?
publication.
Like, what's the difference between an off the record and, as we understand, and background?
off the record is you know, you can use the quote, just don't attribute it to a particular person. So, you know, a source close to the Prime Minister said X. That's off the record because they've background is the background to a story, although it's not attributable. So you can sort of say that the Prime Minister spoke to half a dozen of his ministers before making this decision, but they actually don't want anyone to be saying that. So they'll tell you on background, and you can say, as a matter of fact, this is what happened. That's background. Not for publication is really tricky. And it's all about the context of the story. Like way back when I was in Canberra, a few not for publication instances were when an MP hadn't shown up in Parliament for a while. And it turns out that they were suffering clinical depression and were pretty suicidal. And well, you know, you really don't want to go there, or you didn't really want to go there. It might be a bit different these days, in that mental illness is talked about a lot more than back then. But that's the sort of thing where, not for publication, if it comes up, you want to discuss it with your editor and share the decision on to cooperate with that sort of thing. So it's complicated, I know. And what I used to say to my boss at the LGAQ or mayors that I was dealing with was, treat everything as on the record. If you're talking to a journalist, just make it simple. You know, they're not your friend, but they're not your enemy either. But they're there to get a story, and they'll be hanging on your every word. So make sure that whatever you say to them, you're happy to have on the front page of the Courier.
So everything after hello, you can quote basically.
Yeah.
Hi, how you going? Quoting now. Yes, exactly. What about TV? Is it a bit more simple? Is it on camera and off camera, and that's it?
No,
No,
it's not.
Okay.
So I mean, if we're making phone calls to people and speaking to you, then yeah, essentially that's on the record. If you tell us it's off the record, well, that's fine, it's off the record, but you have to be clear. And there've been a few cases, not many, where someone's had a conversation and then an hour or two later, someone rings up and says, oh, everything I said, that was off the record. It's like,
Annoying,
no, it
super
wasn't.
annoying.
No, it wasn't. You thought about it and
Yeah.
you now want to
Back-
not talk.
Or you've
That's
told your
too late,
PR
right?
person that you've said that stuff and they've gone, no.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Why did we say that? Yeah.
Pull back.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so no, it's exactly the same. The rules of engagement, if you like, are the same for television. Anything that when we're speaking to you is we're taking notes as well. We expect that to be on the record, unless it's specifically pointed out otherwise in advance.
Because you might not actually have somebody standing up speaking in, directly to the camera, but the journalist might use that information in the story in
Yeah.
another way.
Absolutely. And,
yeah.
and again, that will often happen where you
Yeah.
speak to someone and they'll give you something or they'll throw you a couple of lines and say, but I don't want to talk on camera,
Mm,
but you can say this
Mm.
and you'll get statements that way. So,
okay.
One other thing, sorry.
Yes, yeah.
I think it's important is that the journalist has to agree to go off the record. You can't say, well, I'm going off the record here. And often I will say, no, I don't want to hear what you have to say off the record. I want it on the record.
Yeah, good point.
So make sure that you get the journalist's agreement before.
So it's a verbal contract
Yeah.
between you. Yeah, see, I have a different view of off the record. I would have kind of considered the off the record to be what you call not for publication as one and the same. And then I would consider your definition of off the record as more on background.
Right.
So to contextualize.
Mm.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. It's good to hear it
Yeah,
from your side.
yeah.
I think that's
Yeah.
So
good to
I
get
think you'd have those
clarification.
conversations with the journalist to go, this is what I understand it to be, and then have that verbal contract.
Mm.
Otherwise you can end up, or your client can end up in the paper saying something that they really wanted to keep close to to themselves.
Yeah.
So journalists, obviously these days, they're building their own brand as well. So they're doing the stories, they're, publishing them on their own channels and raising a bit of attention for themselves. One of the things that we really fear in PR is being outed if we make a mistake, and a journo is going to tweet, about our
Shame
mistakes. Yeah, shame us publicly. But why is it that our relationships are so fraught, do you think, between journalists and PR?
I think, geez, what a good question.
I
I think,
probably
I
say
think-
here that we do feel that sometimes.
Sometimes I feel that I don't have any rights in terms of if there's complications behind the scenes, it's my problem. I'm not to annoy you with it because I know that you are running on really tight deadlines, and having worked in your role, I understand, that lens. But yeah, sometimes I feel as a PR or a comms person that I can't give you too much context because it's just going to annoy you. So I sort of suck it up. And I think maybe, we understand because we've worked as
Both sides.
journalists, but a lot of comms people never have. And so they're just intimidated and scared, or they might even end up getting a little bit too controlling.
Yeah, too
Yeah.
controlling
Yeah.
is something I have been to jobs when I was on the road where I have PR people trying to tell the camera operator which way to point the camera, how to set up the lights, and then what questions to ask. And there's a point at which you turn around and say, you do your job
Mm.
and let us do our job, But I don't think, I don't think journalists are unreasonable people.
No.
We're not unreasonable and we are people. So, if you feel that you need to say more,
Mm.
say more. Journalists enjoy or should enjoy getting to the bottom of a story, and they should like to have all of the information. And the best journalists that I've come across are the journalists who look and look and look and look and dig and dig and dig and dig until they find a nugget of information that no one else has.
Mm.
And that sets their story apart that night. They're the best journalists. And I've got names in my head, but those people are never going to turn around to you and say to you, you're giving me too much information. They're going to relish having the information. They might be on a tight time frame, and they might be able to say to you, look, I'm sorry, I just don't have time.
I think that's that's the thing too, isn't it? That journos are quite busy, really. So, I mean,
Super busy.
super busy. I've worked in newsrooms where the chief of staff wouldn't actually say goodbye. He would just hang up. And I remember my first day on the job thinking, oh my God, I've done something wrong. He just won't even say goodbye. He's just hung up on me. And then I eventually said, it was Whitey, John White. And I was like, Whitey, you know, what's happening? Why don't you say goodbye? Is everything all right? And he's like, if I say goodbye on every single phone call that I have taken today, I would like say that like 10,000 times in a week. So he's just like, he's just run away with goodbye altogether. It's done. So it's very busy in life, isn't it? Like journos are incredibly busy.
And getting busier. You know, when I started, we had a 30-minute 6 o'clock bulletin. And now we have a 1 hour at 4 o'clock. We have a half-hour Gold Coast news. We have an hour at 6 o'clock as well.
It's a lot of
Then add
content.
sunrise
It's
and morning
a huge
news.
workload.
And the latest as well. So there's a lot going on, and there are a lot of different bulletins and platforms that journalists do now need to service. So yeah, it is busy. It is busy. It's really busy. So, but when you're focused on a story, you still want the information.
Okay. One of the things that we do with PR Darlings is we do like a bit of some speed questions and some questions to really get a bit of a deep dive on the outlets that we cover.
A speedy dive.
A speedy deep dive. It really helps when you're pitching to know exactly what your audience is and your outlet is and what they're after. So let's start with some of those.
So one of the first ones that we always ask is, do you have a particular audience that you're talking to? So start with you, Craig.
AV readers, business, arts, culture, politics, not sport.
Yeah. And
No sport. No sport at all.
Sport, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Well, no, 20% of the time it works, 80% of the time it doesn't. And
interesting.
if that's the case, then you know we'll not put much resources into sport.
Must be why I like your news.
No sport. What about you?
Very much families and older residents as well. I think the younger people are not so engaged with the news cycle at this point. But, you know, we're trying.
Yeah, well, many don't have TVs, really. Yeah, so which is quite shocking to me as a house that has a whole bunch of them. So what about deadlines? What are your best? What's the deadline for you guys? Obviously 6 o'clock news, but you've just mentioned a whole bunch of other options for us to pitch to for the news, etc.
Yeah, look, it would be pretty rare though that you would have a story that runs on 4 p.m. and not on 6 p.m. because realistically, we're not going to have the resources to be able to dedicate someone to do a story for 4 o'clock and take them off 6 o'clock. So realistically, your 4 o'clock and 6 o'clock, it's the same target for you. You really want that story shot and done by 3, you know, and that's at the latest.
That's if it's a murder.
That's at the absolute
unplanned
latest.
murder.
I was subbing stories for our 6 o'clock news tonight. I think the last story I subbed was at a bit after 5:30.
And that's stressful, isn't it? And it's like you're
Very
probably not going to
stressful.
come back to that PR who's given you that story that late in the day.
Yeah, no, that's it.
Yeah.
Well, but by then that work's been done.
Yeah.
By then that work's been done, the story's written and the voice is going down and an editor's frantically cutting the pictures.
They're hating you, by the way. They hate you at that point. Yeah, that time of the day. What about deadlines for you, Craig? Because I know that you have the 2 EDMs that go out at the same time every day. Is that right?
Yeah, one EDM at 12, which is a more substantial sort of news of the day type EDM, and then another one which is mostly breaking news at 4. It's usually full of court stories or police stories or a political development. So for us, I mean, early in the morning is probably the best time to get our attention.
What time?
I start work if I'm doing that edition at 6:30.
Okay.
So if you want something in Queensland during that day at some stage, I get in as early as you can, because by late morning, early afternoon, all we're looking for is breaking news.
Mm.
And
What
there's plenty
about
of that.
sending it to you the day before saying it's?
No, even the day
happening
before.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that we can get ready, and if there's interviews to do, we can set those up and yeah.
And can I weigh into that just with almost an outline of our day and how we shape our day and sorting out what stories we're going to cover for the day. And that will actually start the day before. So while the news is on, the chief of staff will go into the boss's office and say, this is what we have in the file for tomorrow. So we'll sit down and we'll allocate straight away. We'll say, well, that's not going to make it tomorrow. That's not going to make it. That's not going to make it. That's a chance. That's a chance. That's a chance. Then our first conference call in the morning is 7 a.m. So realistically, yeah,
That's
7
early.
a.m.
It
Yeah.
used to be like closer to 8 or 9. Is
Yeah.
that right? Is it,
Yeah.
I wish.
Yeah. Maybe
Um,
that's the Gold Coast.
yeah. Maybe. So, but 7 a.m. We will sit down and we will pretty much allocate every journalist to a story at 7 a.m. And obviously throughout the day it changes because you can't lock in a 6 p.m. bulletin at 7 in the morning. But once, if you guys are making pitches to us, once you passed 7 a.m., if it's even 8 a.m., by that time, you're competing against stories that have already been assigned. So if you want to be, your best chance in terms of getting in the mix is to send something through the day before or at least 6 o'clock the morning of. And that way it all goes into the mix. And so you're in there with every other story before they get assigned. Because once they get assigned and the journalist starts making calls and goes down that road, then you have to physically pull them off that and put them onto another story.
You don't have resources and the time for all of that in a busy news day.
No, 'cause we will allocate most days every journalist a story by 7:10.
Yeah, I was
Wow,
going to
yeah.
ask too, what are the best times for a photo of? Because so many times a client will say, no, I'll make it 3:30 in the afternoon. What are the best times? Usually I always aim for around 10, but with your meeting at 7, would you prefer it earlier?
No, because that's
Yeah.
our meeting at 7,
Yeah.
but the journalists aren't really in until 9 and things will change. So don't think as well, if you miss that, oh, there's no point, I won't bother, that's fine. We'll do another meeting at about 9:30 in the morning. So 10 o'clock is still probably the best time for us, to
What
be
about
honest.
weekends? What about weekends? Do you still, how crewed up are you over the weekends?
Fewer, obviously, we have fewer staff, we have fewer reporters, fewer cameras.
Fewer stories though?
Fewer stories
Mm.
and fewer rounds. There's less likely to be, well, there's no court on a weekend, for example. There's less likely to be a political story on a Saturday. Sundays, you still get the odd political story. Sunday used to be a big political day. That's kind of seemed to have wound back a little bit at the
If you
moment.
had a kind of a crappier story, what would be the best day to pitch it?
It's not like this.
You're polishing this.
On a quiet day, so if you can make sure nothing else happens on that day,
No budget,
pitch me your crap
not-
stories.
yeah,
Yeah.
no budget, not the day that it- Okay.
Yeah, it's any day. Sometimes you have quiet weekends. And so a story that might not make it on the weekday absolutely gets a run on the weekend. But also if you get a busy weekend with a couple of breaking stories, it's gone. It's no chance.
And Craig, for you, you're actually Monday to Friday, aren't you?
Yep.
Yeah,
No,
and then
nothing.
so weekends, nothing on the weekends, but you've got a new arrangement now with
With the weekend edition.
Weekend edition, yeah.
Which has been around for quite a few years now. And the weekend edition is all about food, planning your weekend. So I mean, most of you are business communicators, but if you are involved in the foodie scene or the arts or any sort of cultural type stories, don't forget the weekend edition, because they are really hungry for copy that will appeal to a readership that's a slightly different to in Queensland.
It's a bit younger.
It's a bit younger.
Yeah, sort of urban list.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Young people with a lot of money to spend, professionals who do party hard on the weekend, so to speak, or eat well, that sort of thing. So they come out on a Thursday. So they are planning, their planning starts early on Monday morning for that Thursday email blast. So bear that in mind. They're a bit easier to pitch to than us. We're old and cynical. They're young and very
curious.
What did you?
Can I actually just pick up on something Craig said there as well, is that don't think that necessarily news and you know, in Queensland is probably slightly different, but is all about hard news. You know, we've got an hour to fill. And if we filled an hour of doom and gloom, people would not watch it. You know, it's light and shade for us. So we want to see those inspiring stories as well. We want colour stories. We're looking for those stories. They still have to be engaging and they still have to have merit, but we are actively looking for those stories as well. So it's not all about the hard, serious news or politics or murders. There are other stories that we just, you know, love.
Koalas and babies. And
Yeah.
Sure.
So-
Koalas and babies.
We've got two more questions, so we'll just run through those quickly for you. Because what kinds of stories are you looking for, I think is a great question for all of us to hear. So obviously light and shade, koala babies. Yeah.
Look,
But in terms of-
medical stories that again are different. The key
Research.
thing is different. The key thing is something that I haven't heard before, that our viewers haven't heard before. So, and it happens. Or inspiring stories about, you see all the examples of stories that are coming up that we have.
Oh, God,
we don't like anyone done any of those.
Talk about.
In the
You'll be in
bowl.
so much
In the
trouble.
bowl.
Well, actually, I'll give you an example. We ran for the last 3 days. Cost of living at the moment is a big issue. So the other thing is obviously looking at stories that are issues based. Cost of living is a big one for us. We thought this week, let's go to the top chefs in Brisbane. So we had Restaurant Dan Arnold, we had the chef of Bianca tonight, and yesterday was the chef of La Cachavin. And we went to them with a brief of, can you make us and give us the recipe for a dish that's delicious, healthy, and cheap?
Yeah.
And so we've run 3 stories in a row. So that's not your traditional hard news, but it's something that we thought might appeal to the viewers.
Nice,
Something
yeah.
that they
Nice,
can
yeah.
use, they can take home. We put the recipes on our website as well and point the people there so that they can go and cook the meals that the
meals,
chefs
yeah.
might cook on the weekend at home.
Right, okay.
You know, so that's
Thinking
one
outside the
example,
box.
thinking a little bit outside. the
And then
box.
with your older demographic, given that those are the demographic that are watching TV, I'm assuming it would be superannuation, so a bit of finance, health obviously would be
Superannuation,
huge.
finance, health.
Yeah.
We did a story, we saw a real peak in ratings. We can see minute by minute ratings the next day. We saw a real peak the other day. We did a story that was related to arthritis,
Right,
and bang, the numbers just peaked for
Okay.
that story in particular.
rightio. So looking for so now we know what your audience is. We need to tailor the story to your audience. Great. Craig, what are you guys looking for
Well,
specifically?
local, and something that is business related. If you've got a client as a startup and they have an interesting story, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear from people involved in urban design or architecture. That's a big audience for us. Anything we run, I wrote a story about the old museum being spruced up, and it got thousands of hits. People just, love reading about things that they see every day that interest them. And if there's changes happening to Queen's Wharf, that's the other thing. Infrastructure always is good
That's
for us. So,
interesting because probably the same stories wouldn't resonate with your audience necessarily, or
No,
you're
they
saying
would.
yes?
No, stories like that, it's all visual,
Okay.
and people, so pictures. If you've got something that looks really cool, give me a
Bring it
call.
in.
Yeah. So, yeah, but
and if you've got a client that's, what a good story is, if they've got a good story to tell, please drop us a line. If they're just going through the motions and it's something that they're ticking a box about, don't bother us.
So startup stories, founder stories,
Yeah.
so that
Yeah.
inspiration.
Yeah, the
And
next
last-
Steve Jobs,
last
if you
question.
got the next Steve Jobs.
So last question,
Elon Musk.
we were going to say pet peeves,
Oh,
because we always just do pet peeves, but we were triggered by some of the things. Mike was like, oh God, this email is very triggering.
Yes.
I thought you said these were quick questions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Any fast, quick pet peeves, so we don't do all of these things when we
Yeah.
pitch
What
to you
triggers
next
you
week?
that
What triggers
PRs
you?
do?
Oh, look, I would say the biggest thing is pitching a story and we say, you know what, yeah, love it, let's do it. And you say, oh, the talent's in Timbuktu, you know, or I have one today. I had
Yeah,
one today,
wow. Yeah,
where I got pitched a story and I said, I love it, let's do it. When can we do it? Oh, going to Fiji for a week. Okay, so we now have to wait, you know.
Yeah.
But wait until you've got everything lined up. Put people on standby. Say, look, no promises, but I'm going to make the pitch. So just make sure you're available if it all comes together.
And sometimes they ghost us after they
Yeah.
promise that they're going to be
Yeah.
there, and that's terrible.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. What
Craig?
about you?
Short and sweet, images, please,
Mm,
and make your own judgment. Don't give us crap. Give us a good story.
mm.
I think the saying is don't pitch shit. That's our industry saying. Yeah. So I think we should probably, wrap up. now. Yeah.
So thank you both for coming tonight. The world is changing, and so too are the ways in which PR and media operate. Thank you so much for giving us context and insight into what's actually happening now, today in media. I hope that this was super helpful for people in comms and PR, even if you're in internal comms. You guys are often at the coalface in finding those gold nuggets. So if you do find a gold nugget story like a Steve Jobs that's maybe an entrepreneur within the organisation, go and beat down the door for your external affairs teams and make sure those stories are told.
And we joke a lot about being on the dark side, but really a lot of what we do is very unseen. It's a bit like the iceberg. You know, the tip of the iceberg is the story in the paper and the story on the TV, but underneath that, underneath the surface, there is an enormous amount of work that gets done. And that work relies on really good relationships. And it's kind of why we started the PR Darlings podcast, because we thought we wanted to demystify some of this stuff. We wanted to build better relationships with journalists and PR. And so thank you so much for sharing your knowledge here today, because I think that's been hugely helpful for us. So thank
So
you.
thank you.
Thank you.
And also an extra big thank you to Mel and Liam, who helped
you.
actually put this whole event on. And special shout out to Renee, who's down the back end and has been operating these 3 cameras. She's mic'd us up to make sure that everyone in the Zoom room around Queensland can see and hear us.
Yeah,
So
so
thank you so much.
Thanks to
Thank you.
ProCam for
Thank
that.
you.
So thank you. Thanks, guys.
Well, can everybody join me in giving our guests a massive round of applause? Thank you so much. Now, we know we have gone a little bit over and it is a school night, so we'll just do a couple of questions, but I'm sure if you've got more questions, reach out.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Beautiful.
Yeah, follow us on socials. You can reach out on LinkedIn, John.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Question. Okay, you won't be able to hear this through the room, but we need the microphone for online. So.
Nice.
Hi, thank you everyone. My name's Shay. I've got my own PR business, but I used to be a journo. Michael, this was dedicated targeted at you. Sorry. You mentioned before, obviously you get about 100 pictures a day. Call if you want to check in. When I used to be a journo, I detested the call. And so when I went to PR, I have told my clients that I don't like to do it. And so I was interested in your thoughts about that, because I guess my view as a journo was, if I'm interested, I'll get back to you.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying and I agree. But I sat my chief of staff down.
Yeah.
I sat my chief of staff down this afternoon and I said, hey, you know, tell me about this. And he said, I get 100 story pictures. Some of them can slip through. And if they're not well written, can I?
But you
Very-
know what, maybe what he's meaning is the half-hour wait between the pitch and the call is possibly the problem. So like making sure that there's a bit of time, so he's
Well,
got a
he was
chance to
saying,
read it.
he was saying,
Yeah.
give us time to read it. So he'll skim it. And then if you call and say, oh, just following up on that, he should hopefully know what it's about. If not,
An hour later.
Shay,
call.
I would
Yeah.
say particularly with TV, they're usually grateful for the call because they need to get organised. They need those moving parts. If we can say, okay, we'll organise this vision that can happen at this moment, and whereas for, you know, AAP, your phone interview and done
And
it
it's
dusted.
done and
These
dusted.
guys,
You need a,
yeah.
yeah, that's okay. And also though, if you call and the answer was, look, we're not going to get to it, don't call us in another hour. You'd be surprised.
And if they hang up without saying goodbye. Okay, no, they're just busy, yeah.
All right, we've got time for one more. Back row. Nice and loud.
Hi, sorry again, this is for Michael, sorry. I'm Kylie from the Queensland Museum. We've actually spoken on the phone and we love Channel 7 and I'm here with my colleague Christine. And we offer free car parking as well.
Is that just for work related?
Depends if we get an exclusive. But quick question, one that we are having at the moment is the media call, which we do because we have exhibitions and exhibits.
Yeah.
Our media landscape is narrowing down and we really do it for the TV visuals. And we're, you know, we love having you guys and you're very supportive of us, but where do you see the media call going for institutions like the museum?
I don't see there being an end to the media call for great visual opportunities. Museum, obviously, fantastic visuals at the museum. The exhibitions that are all new, and we love doing it. I've done a lot with GOMA as well, both when I was reporting and even now. I do a lot with GOMA when they have their new exhibitions coming in, and they're fantastic. And we organise to get the cameras down there, hopefully in advance, and do exclusives most of the time. But I think the media call is a great thing. It gets everyone there on the same page together.
I think maybe the way to do it, and we've done this in the past with some stories, is actually have a window of time rather than a 10 o'clock call. So say you can come between 10 and 2, so that you know you can get there when you're on the way back from a sports story. You can send the crew there at that, you know, around that time. So maybe it's not a 10 a.m. call out in the future. Maybe it's a window of time for people to get there.
That's probably a fair call. Because as you would know, there would have been times that we've said, yeah, we'll try to get there, and we haven't been able to. So I guess the other thing with that is there another time that suits them? You know, even if you do your media call and we can't make it, what about later? What about earlier? Is there something else that, you know, that maybe it's just the fact that because we've sat here in rooms like this and said 10 o'clock's the best time, everyone said 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
So, you know, there are always ways, and
also
particularly for those cool stories.
sometimes it's nice to actually have different times if you've got competing TV networks, so that it doesn't become a bit more of a static, it's like a press conference. So you can do your one-on-one interviews as opposed to just holding the mics out. So I like that idea of the window that Joe's been.
And what about video news releases? Say in their case, you know, it potentially you could actually do a great video news release before. Will you take those, or is that kind of? It depends how it's shot too, isn't it? You need a news cameraman.
Yeah, it does. It depends how it's shot. And also, I think I don't love to use VNRs. I much prefer to shoot our own vision. Push comes to shove, I've got a VNR of, you know, 4 minutes of really beautiful vision in front of us. If that's easy to take and I don't have a camera to go and shoot it, I'll take a VNR. But I'd rather shoot it ourselves. I would rather, and that way we can have our reporter down there. You know, what a VNR doesn't give you from a TV perspective is our own people on the ground. It doesn't give my reporter a presence in that story. So that's my hesitance with VNRs.
Some good options there for you guys though. And the free car parking, just I want to mention that again. So,
Brilliant. Well, thank you again so much for coming along tonight, and to our online guys for joining in from wherever you are around Queensland. You'll notice on your tables there is a QR code. We would love to get your feedback. I know these guys would too. So it only take a couple of minutes to fill out that feedback survey for us. We would be eternally grateful. Our next event is coming up in a month or so, and it's all about how you measure the impact of your communication. And then what do you do with that measurement? How do you tell a story with that data that actually proves your value back to your organizations or whoever it is that you're trying to impress at the time? Also, if you've got any questions about IABC membership, we've got Jemima over here, who is our director of our membership portfolio. So go have a chat to Jemima. Any other questions on the way out, feel free to tap one of us on the shoulders. Otherwise, thank you again so much for making the time tonight. And thank you again to our guests. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.